Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. So we're on my Instagram account. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram. I post additional content on here. A lot of the quotes that are on my spreadsheets are on here. This is a great alternative to my spreadsheets if you don't want to access those. And I did a story, and you'll notice that I have these story highlights where you have these different topics. And one of my most recent stories was this one. Okay, so I noticed something in here. This is something I've already shared on the channel, and now I'm sharing it to Instagram. But this is a quote from President Lorenzo Snow, and you can find it in Millennial Star, January 2nd, 1902, page 2. The site for the city of Zion was pointed out by the prophet Joseph Smith as Jackson County, Missouri. And there, some of our people settled in 1831, but were subsequently driven from their homes. This event, while it delayed the building of the city, did not change the place of its location. The Latter-day Saints fully expect to return to Jackson County and build up Zion, quote unquote. Their exodus to the Rocky Mountains and their sojourn in the quote unquote stakes of Zion, as the places are called, which they now inhabit, they regard as preparatory to that return and as events that had to be in order to fulfill scripture, notably these words of Isaiah. O Zion, that bringest good tidings, get thee up into the high mountain. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. So this stuck out to me this time because it made me think. We're going to go to another Instagram account. This is Visit Temple Square. It made me think about this monument or plaque that they've recently installed on Temple Square. This is the church office building plaza. They're tying the entire thing into Temple Square, is what I've read. They want you to think as the entire 2 blocks as like Temple Square. But anyway, so this is over by the church office building, and you can see the temple in the background, and you have that scripture that we just read. It's from Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. And so I guess I never thought about it the way that President Lorenzo Snow said it, that going to Utah, going to Salt Lake, establishing church headquarters there was preparatory for the return. And he specifically references this scripture, and President Nelson has given emphasis to this, as we're about to see. I have a few quotes to read to you. This is a President Nelson thing. I mean, maybe this was in the works, before President Nelson. I have no idea the timeline of things. But in a lot of people, before we continue, they'll say, well, actually the church has it wrong. The tops of the mountains, that's referring to the mountains of Israel. Like, for example, you have the Temple Mount, Mount Zion. And when Isaiah is talking about that kind of thing, he's talking about Mount Zion and the temple. And I think that's partially true, but I think there's, with a lot of scriptures, especially in Isaiah, there's double meaning. I'm sure you're already aware of this, but let's take a look at Google Earth. And by now, I'm sure that most people understand and realize the similarity between Israel and Salt Lake City or Utah in general. You have this fresh body of water up here, Utah Lake, and you have the River Jordan that connects the Utah Lake with the Great Salt Lake, and this is similar to Israel. You have the Dead Sea. So I put these place markers are as though we were putting Jerusalem or Israel on top of Utah. Okay, so this is the map of Utah, but it's upside down. It's south is up and north is down. But you can see the similarity. These 2 lakes, you have this terminal lake, the Great Salt Lake, which just like the Dead Sea, it's very salty. It's because it doesn't drain out. You have rivers that drain into the Great Salt Lake, but you don't have any that go out. And so it gets nasty and salty and stinky, but it's like the Dead Sea. And similar, if you go north into the west a little bit, you have Salt Lake City, or in the case of Israel, you have Jerusalem, which is relatively in the same spot in relation to the Great Salt Lake as Jerusalem is to the Dead Sea. And so I put all these other, places on here. You can go out. In southern Utah, you have a place called Cedar City, which, of course, we all know the phrase, the cedars of Lebanon. So it's almost like that represents Lebanon. I'm not saying that this is official, but and then when you go this way, you have Las Vegas, which is relatively in the same spot that Babylon would be, or in other words, Iraq, Israel right here, Iraq over here, Babylon. And then further this way, you have Los Angeles in California, which you could say is like Persia. You have these like different empires of antiquity. The Babylonians first, and after that, the Persians and Medians, and after that, the Greeks. In fact, if you go this way, it's interesting because if you turn the world upside down and look at the Northern Hemisphere, it actually, it resembles the Eastern Hemisphere. You have this part down here, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is kind of similar to Greece, like the shape of it. Italy, in this case, the lower part of Michigan is shaped like a mitten or a hand, whereas Italy is shaped like a boot or a foot, right? You come over here to like Maine in this part of Canada, and it resembles, Portugal and Spain. You go up here, this part, like the North Carolina area, kind of resembles France and the hexagon of France. Up here, you have Cuba that would correspond to the United Kingdom, Dominican Republic, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Haiti. So there's kind of like this like similarity in a way. And Utah in the Salt Lake area would correspond to Israel, So there's this like geographic relationship and similarity. And there are two things going on at the same time. You have the Jews that are literally returning to the land of Israel and Jerusalem. And then you have the headquarters of the church in Salt Lake, where for a time you did have to literally go to Salt Lake to be with the church and be somewhere where there was a temple. But now, it is still a gathering place in the sense that it's the headquarters of the church, which is responsible for the gathering of Israel throughout the world. So you have like a dual thing going on, the two gatherings. So you can see how this could apply both to Jerusalem as well as Salt Lake. Okay. So let's move on. I have this spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. We're on what's currently row 428 for Salt Lake Temple. You can access my spreadsheets anytime. The link is in the description box of each video. I have a couple interesting quotes here. This first one is from Brent Roberts, Managing Director of the Special Projects Department. And this is a podcast from Church News with Sarah Jane Weaver. And it's from May 21st, 2024. Episode 189, Salt Lake Temple Renovation Update with Brent Roberts and Andy Kirby. I remember when we put the monument of Isaiah 2, verse 2, if you look at the State Street side, as you enter the plaza on the State Street side, as we put that monument up, he was absolutely thrilled, talking about President Nelson. President Nelson was absolutely thrilled. And we were all thrilled because it says, "And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountains of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it." Well, the President Nelson, took a portion of that scripture, "all nations shall flow unto it," and gave to us part of our mandate. He said, quote, "If all nations are going to be here, then technologically we need to take care of all nations." End quote. And so the audio-visual portion that will be in the temple itself for the patrons will be in so many languages, and people for the first time throughout the world can come to Salt Lake the Salt Lake Temple, attend the Salt Lake Temple, and be able to hear it in their own language. And he says, and we all think that's partial fulfillment of what Isaiah talked about, the mountain of the Lord and his special temple. And then later on, Sarah Jane Weaver says, and there's also an area of the plaza that shows flags of the world. Tell us about those. And then Brent Roberts says, I was just at a meeting a few weeks ago with President Nelson, and he looked out his window and looked into that. And he said, quote, it is exactly as we as a first presidency envisioned it would be. It is beautiful. And he said, what have you done with what you have done with the flowers around, and they happen to be pink flowers at that time, just enhances the square. And it is not a stagnant area. With the flags moving and the wind bustling through the trees, it is exactly what we envisioned. And it shows the world that all children of God are welcome. Okay, then I have another quote. This is from John Fenn, Vice President, Project Executive, Jacobson Construction Company. And this is a church newsroom YouTube video posted August 30th of 2024. Temple Square Plaza's completed and transformed. And he says, President Nelson highlighted that he saw in vision, the nations of the world coming to this area. Okay, so just a recap. So far, we've talked about what Lorenzo Snow said about the Saints coming to Utah as being preparatory to returning to Missouri. And again, the entire church isn't going to Missouri, okay? But it is going to become, like, the New Jerusalem is going to become one of the two world headquarters that he talked about in his recent General Conference talk. The New Jerusalem in Jackson County, what's currently Jackson County, Missouri, and then the Old Jerusalem. And Utah being preparatory for that. And President Lorenzo Snow saying that the Saints had to go to Utah in order to fulfill Isaiah 2:2. Okay, so let's move on. I have some more. Okay, so I have another row. This is row 356. The topic is Olympics, Winter Olympics. And church leaders have talked about the significance of the Winter Olympics coming to Salt Lake. We're going to look at this most recent General Conference, what Elder Stevenson said, and then we're going to go back to the 2002 Winter Olympics and how President Hinckley said that this prophecy of Brigham Young was fulfilled with the 2002 Winter Olympics. So for this one, we're going to go to the church website for Elder Stevenson's talk because it has this picture of what Salt Lake looked like. This is viewing the city from the west, looking east. There's the temple right there, the church office building. And I still remember this like it was yesterday. At this time, I was in high school, and I loved going downtown on tracks and just seeing the city full of people. You know, because back then, it's a small, big city. Salt Lake is a small, big city. But even smaller back then. So whenever you would go downtown, you would see people walking around, but it wasn't like a bustling metropolis. And so when the Olympics came to town, I just remember noting the contrast between what I knew before and just like how it felt like a bustling metropolis when the Olympics were there. Since that time, I think Salt Lake has become more busy with like foot traffic because that area is growing. But anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if they do something similar with like these photos and artwork on the sides of the buildings. Okay, so Elder Stevenson. In 2034, thousands of dignitaries, visitors, and athletes from around the world will flood the streets of Salt Lake City, the stage for the Winter Olympic Games. There's perhaps no greater demonstration of worldwide unity than that embodied in the Olympic Games. The eyes of the world will be upon the church and its members. affording a multitude of opportunities to volunteer, serve, and share glad tidings through kind deeds, an event never to be forgotten. These upcoming moments will provide members of the church everywhere with increased opportunities to share the glad tidings of the gospel of Jesus Christ through word and deed, a decade never to be forgotten. Yeah, so in his talk, he talks about all these different things that will or already have, in the case of President Nelson's 100th birthday, bring in or have a very large and a very wide audience. And the 2034 Winter Olympics being one of those. And by the way, I just want to point out, Salt Lake, it was announced that Salt Lake City would be that city. It was announced on July 24th of this year. That's Pioneer Day. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, now let's go to Presidents Brigham Young and President Hinckley. First, let's read President Brigham Young's prophecy. You can find this in this book by Preston Nibley, Brigham Young, the man and his work, page 128. This is Brigham Young talking. God will temper the climate, and we shall build a city and a temple to the Most High God in this place. We will extend our settlements to the east and west, to the north and to the south, and we will build towns and cities by the hundreds, and thousands of the saints will gather in from the nations of the earth. This will become the great highway of the nations. Kings and emperors and the noble and wise of the earth will visit us here. So that's the prophecy that President Hinckley said was fulfilled with the 2002 Winter Olympics. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you may want to, on your own time, come here to the spreadsheet and read this, or you can stop the video, pause it and then read it. I'm just going to read the highlights. The headquarters of the church are in this city, which recently hosted the 19th Winter Olympics. We made a deliberate decision that we would not use this as a time or place to proselytize, but we were confident that out of this significant event would come a wonderful thing for the church. Well, it all worked out. The visitors came by the hundreds of thousands. Television carried the picture to billions of people across the earth. Newspapers and magazines ran story after story. Thousands upon tens of thousands walked through Temple Square, admired the majestic house of the Lord, sat in the tabernacle, and listened to the matchless music of the choir. More thousands filled this great conference center to watch a wonderful production dealing with the church and its worldwide mission. Other thousands visited the Family History Center. The media were hosted in the Joseph Smith Memorial Building. We were interviewed for television, radio, and the press by correspondents from many parts of the station and from across the world. I am told that nearly 4,000 stories about the church appeared in the German press alone. Okay, later on, if there were time, I could give you many quotations from the seasoned journalists of the world who wrote in a most laudatory fashion. We had private interviews with presidents of nations, with ambassadors, with leaders in business, and other fields. So truly, you guys, not just tourists, not just athletes, but presidents, ambassadors, leaders in business and other fields. And then he goes on to say, in 1849, 2 years after our people first arrived here and following the discovery of gold in California, many were discouraged. They had struggled to wrest a living from the arid soil. Crickets had devoured their crops. The winters were cold. Many thought they would go to California and get rich. President Young stood before them and encouraged them to remain, promising that, and then he reads part of the prophecy. And then after that, President Hinckley says, "We have witnessed the fulfillment of that prophecy in these recent days." So this is really exciting stuff. And let's end with this. So again, we're talking about being in Utah or having church headquarters in Utah being preparatory to returning to Missouri. And when I say returning to Missouri, I'm talking about church headquarters moving to Missouri and literally building the city, which has already partially started because we have a stake right there in Independence, Missouri. So we have the people. I've covered in previous videos, I have a playlist about New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem, had it been built at the time of Joseph Smith, would have been a city of 15 to 20,000 people. That's it. And then after the city was complete, you would go on and build another city that would be 15 to 20,000 people. And every city would be a stake. And every stake would be a city. So we already have the people there. And the Independence Visitor Center was built to be one of the 24 temples. So in a sense, New Jerusalem, the actual building of it, has already started. And it may be that that's all that there needs to be before the second coming. I tend to think, you guys, that the Old Testament and Israel returning to the Promised Land after being in Egypt, I feel like that's a foreshadowing of the church, the righteous and the church entering into the millennium. Like the Promised Land is like a foreshadowing of the millennium. And I think that because you have the story of Jericho, where that's the first time in Scripture that you find 7 trumpets. The next time that you see 7 trumpets is in the book of Revelation. And then 2 more times in the same section of the Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, that has to do with the second coming. I feel like that's all connected. Okay, so I think it's going to be a similar situation where, just like when Israel entered the Promised Land, the Ark, and you could say church headquarters, did not go to Jerusalem. Okay, it went to Shiloh, and it stayed there for a long time, like 300 years, and then eventually, David, he conquered Jerusalem, took it from the Jebusites. It became the city of David. Later on, just Jerusalem itself. And then finally, after about 300 plus years, that's when they built the temple. And so I think that what we're seeing and what we will see is that church headquarters is probably going to remain in Salt Lake into the millennium. And then when the time's right, it's going to move over to Jackson County, Missouri. So, and I have more reason to believe that. Let's read this from Wilford Woodruff. He was president of the church when he said this. This is in Conference Report. It's the April 1898 General Conference, page 57. I arrived in Kirtland on Saturday and there met with Joseph and Hiram in the street. I was introduced to Joseph Smith. It was the first time that I had ever seen him in my life. He invited me home to spend the Sabbath with him, and I did so. They had meeting on Sunday. On Sunday night, the prophet called us all who held the priesthood to gather into the little log house they had there. It was a small house, perhaps 15 feet square, but it held the whole of the priesthood of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who were then in the town of Kirtland and who had gathered together to go off in Zion's camp. That was the first time I ever saw Oliver Cowdery or heard him speak, the first time I ever saw Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball and the 2 Pratts and Orson Hyde and many others. There were no apostles in the church then except Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. When we got together, the prophet called upon the elders of Israel with him to bear testimony of this work. Those that I have named spoke, and a good many that I have not named bore their testimonies. When they got through, the prophet said, "Brethren, I have been very much edified and instructed in your testimonies here tonight, but I want to say to you before the Lord that you know no more concerning the destinies of this church and kingdom than a babe upon its mother's lap. You can't comprehend it." I was rather surprised. He said, "It is only a little handful of priesthood you see here tonight, but this church will fill North and South America. It will fill the world." Among other things, he said, now pay attention to this as we're thinking about Salt Lake being the current center place or headquarters of the church, and the second coming, and Jackson County. Listen to this. Among other things, he said, it will fill the Rocky Mountains. There will be tens of thousands of Latter-day Saints who will be gathered in the Rocky Mountains, and there they will open the door for the establishing of the gospel among the Lamanites, who will receive the gospel and their endowments and the blessings of God. This people will go into the Rocky Mountains. They will there build temples to the Most High. They will raise up a posterity there, and the Latter-day Saints who dwell in these mountains will stand in the flesh until the coming of the Son of Man. The Son of Man will come to them while in the Rocky Mountains. So, you guys, it's things like this that makes me think that church headquarters is going to remain in Salt Lake into the millennium, and it's probably going to be a Shiloh situation. Although we do have the first temple built for New Jerusalem, but it's currently being used as a visitor center. I think that's what's going to happen. And then you have all these other times. These are all the other times that I know of that Joseph Smith talked about the church going into the Rocky Mountains. So, again, this is my quotes A through Z spreadsheet, row 264, Joseph Smith Jr., Rocky Mountains. And if you go to the right, you have all these different times that he talked about the Saints going into the Rocky Mountains and coming to Utah. In fact, I just want to share this one really quick. This one is from Diary of Charles Lowell Walker, Volume 2, pages 524 to 526. Brother McBride, right here. Brother McBride also related that Joseph marked with his cane in the sand the track the Saints would take to the Rocky Mountains. Says Joseph, will you establish the kingdom there? No. He says no. Because there's some people that think that the plan has changed. The church is not going to it's not going to establish its headquarters again in Jackson County, that we're no longer required to do that. Joseph Smith says no, but it will be set up and the saints will live. Okay. And the saints will live their covenants, meaning the marriage covenant. Said we should travel on through the mountains, describe the valley of Great Salt Lake, just as though he had lived there, designating where the soldiers' camp would be and the burying ground. So that's really interesting. And that's pretty much going to be it for this. I just want to remind you, I have this other spreadsheet called Quotes, Common Misconceptions, and there are many, many, many misconceptions when it comes to New Jerusalem. So column A, you have the topic. So you just scroll down here until you get to New Jerusalem. And then column B has the specific misconception. And then to the right of that, you have all the scriptures and quotes from, prophets and apostles and church leadership that go along with whatever the thing is. So the first one is what we just read from President Wilford Woodruff about the saints being in the Rocky Mountains when Christ comes again. This is a big misconception here that the entire church is going to go to Jackson County, and that's not true. In fact, I think this is the one that I have the most quotes for. Maybe it's the second most. No, the entire church is not going to go to Jackson County. You have other ones where people make it seem like, yeah, you have to go there. That's where you're going to have it. It's literally in Jackson County. That's the only place that you're going to have defense or refuge from the storm, which is not true. Along those same lines, that you have to literally fight your neighbor in combat, and then participate in like World War III or the Second American Civil War or whatever, or you'll have to go to Jackson County, and that's not true. There's other ones. The yellow dog prophecy. People are like, well, don't move to Missouri yet because it still has to be destroyed. No. They dispelled this myth in the ensign, the April 1979 ensign. It's a myth. It's anyway, I'm not going to get into that. I've done videos about it. The misconception that we've been excused from building the New Jerusalem in Jackson County. No, that's not true. That is still the plan. I just read from Lorenzo Snow here under my New Jerusalem story highlights. And then the idea that Salt Lake is the New Jerusalem, and that it's going to be the center place through the millennium. No, it's not. Probably the best evidence for that, or the one that most people would accept, is that President Nelson himself has said it's still going to be Jackson County. This is in his book called Daily Joy, published in 2020, page 150. New Jerusalem in Jackson County. So take some time, read these quotes. Please share them. Save them onto your own documents. You can copy this entire thing if you want. Copy them all. And then share them to help clarify and dispel misconceptions that are still just running rampant. Okay, so that's it for this one. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram for additional content like this. I don't know if you saw the moon and Venus last night, but it was pretty incredible. And then you have these story highlights. There's a bunch of them. And I'm just going to keep adding on to this. For YouTube, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.